I'm Bonnie Gabowitz for Ward Talk, and we are speaking today with Travis Radina from Ward 3, one of our newer members. Welcome to Ward Talk.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. It's great to finally meet with you and have this opportunity.
Yes, and since you're a new member on the council since last November, I wanted to get a sense of what your background is and what made you want to get involved with city council and governing. It's a big responsibility. So tell us your story.
Yeah, thanks. So I actually first came to Ann Arbor way back in 2004 to attend the university and fell in love with the city way back then. But when I graduated from Michigan, I had the opportunity to go up to Lansing for a number of years and work in the State House of Representatives. And so I worked for then Democratic floor leader Kate Siegel, who represented Battle Creek and Albion, working on both constituent issues and legislative issues for her. And then, 7-8 years ago now, I had the opportunity to move back to Ann Arbor and jumped on it. And so I work now at the Alumni Association at Michigan. I am the past president of the Jim Toy Community Center, which is the LGBTQ resource center here in town. And purchased my first home here about 4 years ago now. And so I am here to stay and absolutely love everything about Ann Arbor, but really one of the reasons that I decided to run for council was because I saw an opportunity to give back. I was engaged with council through my work at the Jim Toy Center and just through other advocacy here in the community. I'm incredibly passionate about equity issues. I think representation matters, and for a city that passed the first ever gay pride resolution, that elected the first openly LGBTQ member of any public body. Ann Arbor didn't have any LGBTQ representation in its city government. And so that was one of the reasons I decided to run. But I also just recognized that we were in a housing and affordability crisis here in Ann Arbor. And, my sister is a social worker, and she couldn't afford to live here in Ann Arbor if she weren't living with me and renting a room from me in my house, because it's just unfeasible for folks, our social workers, some of our nurses and essential workers and things like that to live in the city, or to live in the city that they work in each day. And so those were really the things that motivated me to run.
Well, that really shows that you have not only experience, but you have real heart in terms of wanting to make a difference and help with the issues you see are important. So in the few months that you've been working, I know every council member is attached to several committees and commissions. So it's not just working on the council. So tell us a little bit about what committees and commissions you're on and what updates you'd like to give. Take it away.
I am on a number of committees and commissions. I would say probably the ones that have been most active recently are the Human Rights Commission, Housing and Human Services Advisory Board. I serve on the Public Art Commission and the Energy Commission, and that is just a few of the ones that I work on. But that has also led into a lot of kind of the work that I'm able to do, the things that I'm passionate about. And so, I really wanted to work on equity issues, and so the Human Rights Commission was a natural fit. The Human Rights Commission also has, by the nature of the way that ICPOC was founded, it has some role, and so I have some role in helping to appoint members to the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission, and then I also get to work on some housing and affordability issues through my work on the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board.
So what changes or progress have you seen in the months since you started?
Yeah.
What updates can you give us about the housing issues?
Yeah, well, and there's so much. I feel like in just the 8 months or so now that I've been on council, we have had, I would say, definitely our fair share of potential new housing development here in Ward 3 in particular. But a few of them are approved, but I don't think ground has been broken yet. And so we should see some new housing coming on Packard. I think the 211 Packard site, which was kind of a mixed use property that was really embraced by the neighbors from the community members who reached out to me, because right now it's a kind of, ugly parking lot with some one-story buildings on it. And this is an opportunity to really transform that space into something that makes it a little bit more livable and walkable in that neighborhood. We've got the Lockwood senior housing coming right, actually pretty close to my backyard over here on Ellsworth. And there are going to be a number of affordable units in that for seniors for at least the next 99 years, which in reality is probably the life of the building.
Have they broke ground yet for that?
They do not, I believe. They have not yet broken ground from what I can tell. And then I am continuing to work on, and I know that this one is of particular interest to my neighbors over on Easy Street and Caramel Street, is the 2857 Packard site, which has been a source of conversation for quite some time, because there are some bur oak trees that are older than the city itself on the property that I think a lot of people believe are worth saving. And also really there's an approved site plan right now that was court ordered that I think pretty much everyone is unhappy with. And so there's potentially an opportunity there to rethink some of the ways that we might develop that property in a way that brings some additional housing to the community, but also is less detrimental to the environment around it and the neighborhood around it. And so that's something that we continue to work on, and I'm working with staff on, so that we can see if there might be alternatives and we could go back and try to renegotiate the site plan.
Okay, and what other commissions or committees are you on?
Well, so I'm also on the Human Rights Commission, and I've been doing a lot of work there. We've got, there are hopefully going to be at one of our next couple of meetings on conversion therapy ban here in the city. I know that the governor recently signed an executive order that would ban the use of taxpayer funds to go towards conversion therapy, but in reality, that's just a piece of the puzzle. And this is frankly what I believe to be an abusive practice that needs to be outlawed statewide. I am fully supportive of my friend, State Representative Felicia Brabeck's legislation that would do just that. But barring the will for the state legislature to take that action, we're working on something here in Ann Arbor that would at least ban it within city limits. And our Human Rights Commission has been working really diligently for a long time, since before I was in council.
So are you saying that the city is looking to not only support what the state is trying to do, but you might go further in what you want to restrict?
Yeah, unfortunately, we have had a long history of Ann Arbor representatives introducing this legislation for a statewide ban for a number of sessions now, dating back to Adam Zemke's time in the legislature at the very least. Unfortunately, the current Republican majority doesn't seem interested in passing that legislation. And so similar to a few other pieces that we have gone further than the state, we're expressing our values and taking a stand and saying, until the state takes action and protects all Michigan residents, at the very least, we're going to protect our residents here in Ann Arbor. And so we are hoping to do that. I know that they have been working hard because they want to make it as strong a piece of legislation as possible, to make sure, particularly, I think one of the big issues is with the rise of all of our online communication, particularly around the pandemic, they want to make sure that it's not just going to be an ordinance that's so narrowly crafted that it would only protect people from in-person therapy sessions, for example. So
this got more complicated with the pandemic and the way people communicate or get medical treatment.
It also gets complicated, frankly, just when you're trying to implement these civil rights protections piecemeal, municipality to municipality, because we also have to contend with the fact that because of the use of technology, there may be a conversion therapy provider who is living outside of the city, who is trying to provide those abusive practices to a child living within the city. And what is our ability then to take action against an individual outside of our borders if the action is happening in our city? And so those are the types of issues that we've been working with staff to really hammer out.
So Travis, I'm a bit surprised because This is a topic that's really kind of underground. Like I wasn't even aware that it was such a major problem. Do you have any history of how it's affected people, or of cases where action had to be taken because it had just gone too far,
Mhm.
or it
So
was getting, the treatment was changing
yeah.
to a worse treatment? How
Um,
did that happen?
Yeah, so luckily there are not that many known cases here in Ann Arbor. We have not necessarily heard of folks coming forward to the Human Rights Commission to file complaints now, although generally folks don't file complaints until something is outlawed, and then they have a means to go through that. But we do know that there were some relatively high profile cases here in the state, and what we want to do is prevent it from being a problem here as well, particularly with, we are an accepting and welcoming community, and love our LGBTQ neighbors. We want to make sure that they're protected from this potential threat. And so this is not only just addressing a problem that we know exists that the state is not providing a solution for, but it's also a statement of our values and where we stand as a community, and an abusive practice like this to take place.
Okay, well, thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah.
And the minute we have left before the break, I know that the DDA was looking to increase funding.
Yeah.
The city was going to help out increase funding. And I believe that the last meeting, there was some funding that was voted on. So could you tell us about that?
Yeah, this was a relatively, I think, straightforward request. So there was some additional bond revenue related to pedestrian safety and street improvements that needed to be spent down, and so I think we allocated just over $550,000 to the DDA for some planned street improvements and pedestrian infrastructure. I believe there will be another protected bike lane that's wrapped into that project, and so it is funding directly for kind of some of those stated purposes.
Great. Okay. And when we come back, we'll talk more about Ann Arbor.
All right.
This is Bonnie Gabowitz. You're watching Ward Talk. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to email us at ctn@a2gov.org, attention Ward Talk. You can also check us on Twitter at twitter.com/CTN Ann Arbor. We'll be right back.
Greasy pizza boxes.
Ugh, glass bottles not emptied.
Yogurt containers with, ew! Cat food still in the can is bad.
But oh, so good.
Hey, what are you doing?
Relax, Mom. We're here to help.
Oh, this stuff could ruin the entire recycling load.
Wow, I had no idea.
Chill, we'll show you the ropes.
Michigan needs to recycle better, and that change starts with you. Learn the rules of recycling at recyclingraccoons.org.
This is Bonnie Gabowitz for Ward Talk. We are continuing our conversation with Travis Radina from Ward 3. Welcome back, Travis. Time goes very quickly in this show, and I know we have a lot of things to go over, but I found that this particular month, there have been a lot of new information, a lot of changes. So let's just jump right in with the Crown Amendment and tell us about what that is.
I am happy to. And so this is an amendment to our non-discrimination ordinance that I sponsored. It was adopted at our last meeting unanimously by council. And previously it had been unanimously approved by our Human Rights Commission. This is a really straightforward amendment to our non-discrimination ordinance. It's, I think, 1 or 2 sentences that prevents discrimination against race-based hairstyles. So particularly hair texture and protective hairstyles, things like braids, locks, twists, and head wraps.
Now, let me ask you, have we had any situations that have arisen where people have been mistreated because of that, either in the public schools or out in public or in businesses?
Yeah, so we know that this is a problem. This is another one of those things where until we have a formal process in place for people to file complaints, we're likely not hearing about it in a formal way. But actually Dove, the hair care company, did a study on this a couple of years ago and found that 80% of Black women express a need to change their hair in their workplace in order to fit in. They were 1.5 times more likely to be sent home from work because of their hair. And they were 3.4 times more likely to be perceived as unprofessional because of their hair. And there was also a recently really high profile case out of Mount Pleasant, Michigan, where a 7-year-old girl had her hair cut by a school faculty member without her parents' permission. And so those are all instances. I think most of us have seen some of the microaggressions that exist around Black women's hair in particular, but a lot of different hairstyles for particularly underrepresented individuals in our community. And this was a problem that I think we wanted to address, but also, again, this is another issue that I would love to see passed statewide. Felicia Brabeck and Yusuf Rabi are co-sponsoring legislation brought forward by Sarah Anthony from Lansing to pass this statewide, and Michigan could become the 14th state to pass this protection statewide for Black residents, but really any residents of color.
So Ann Arbor isn't waiting around for the state. You're just taking the ball and running with it. And at what point is the Crown Amendment now in the books?
The Crown Amendment was passed. There's a brief period of time where the clerk has to post it, and then I think it takes 10 days to be enacted.
Okay. And my question to you then would be, how does the city publicize and inform everybody that this is now, in the books and people can't behave a certain way no matter what they think?
Well, so this is a huge part of the Human Rights Commission's charge. And so they do a significant amount of work trying to advertise and spread the word. They're particularly talking about that coming up here on how they can continue to educate individuals about their civil rights protections here in Ann Arbor. Some of that may be requiring postings at workplaces and things like that, so that that employees know their rights, particularly when it comes to discrimination.
Yeah, great. And so tell us a little bit about what's happening with providing help with renters and giving them some backup in the law. What is Ann Arbor doing with the Housing Commission and all that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that I'm working on right now for renters. One is in partnership with Councilmember Elizabeth Nelson. We are working on an early leasing ordinance, which would extend the period of time before a landlord could require a tenant to re-sign their lease for the next year. Right now, that period is just a really short 90 days. And so what we often find, particularly among our student community, but among all renters, is that folks are moving into a new place, and within a really short period of time are being forced to sign a lease for an apartment that's still more than half a year away. And so not only does that require them to make commitments before really their plans are probably set, but it's also stretching them out, particularly those individuals who don't have the financial resources to have 2 security deposits out there, to have all of these expenses and financial commitments made a year in advance is really troubling. And so we are working to extend that period of time. I think right now the working number we're looking at is 210 days after you sign a lease, which would move, if you're an August leaseholder, if that's when your lease starts, it would move your rental period out to probably March before you're required to re-sign.
And that still gives plenty of time
It
for
does.
both sides, really.
It does.
Yeah.
That's what we think. It would provide the renters with a little bit more security and ability to know what their plans are for the next year. But then we're also looking at I think the key thing right now is the enforcement piece. And so we're exploring some different options around kind of maybe a right of first refusal that would provide renters the opportunity to have that first option as to whether or not they want to re-sign. But if not that, then we're looking at other alternatives as well. And so we just want to make sure that renters have that protection. And then the other piece that I'm working on with that is our Renters Commission. Seattle has established several years ago a Renters Commission to provide renters with a stronger voice in their community. We know that renters make up a majority of Ann Arbor residents, and yet we don't have a formal mechanism for renters to provide advice and counsel to us as a body. There are 11 members of council, if you include the mayor, and none of us are currently renters. And so I think there's an important voice and perspective that they should be able to provide. There are a number of issues we're working on that renters should formally have a say in. And so I want to give them a commission so that they can weigh in on policy and help to advise council policy direction as well.
Wow, what's happening? All right, and let's move on to public safety.
Yeah.
I know you're very involved in that. So what's happening with that?
Yeah, so this is both through my role in Human Rights Commission, but also just out of personal interest. We have coming up at I believe our very next meeting, an ordinance revision related to the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission, ICPOC. One would some pretty straightforward changes, honestly, in partnership with ICPOC leadership. Some of it is a change to the appointment process. We want to establish that ICPOC is truly an independent commission and has the ability to provide some independent oversight. And so what we are doing is proposing a change to the ordinance that would require that any new appointments to ICPOC have the recommendation of ICPOC, so that we're not just filling the commission with people that ICPOC doesn't feel are appropriate for the role. It would also expand the number of information managers on ICPOC right now, because they are dealing with sensitive information and sometimes employee information that is confidential. Currently, only 3 members of ICPOC are allowed to have access to that information. Unfortunately, that also leads to a lot of burnout and requirement for those 3 individuals to handle pretty much every investigation. So we're going to try to expand that to 5 members so that they have a little bit more flexibility and folks can rotate in and out. And then we're also, the third piece of that is allowing a change that would allow the chief to initiate earlier investigations of certain incidents if they are going to have specific public interest. And so currently ICPOC has some ability to provide oversight, but they have to wait until internal reviews are over. This would allow the chief to be able to go to ICPOC and say, we want you to start your review process earlier.
So it's really tricky to have a balance where we're looking to have the best way of the police to provide safety for our community, and yet we want them to have the protection of privacy as well in terms of personnel issues. Then you have a commission of residents who volunteer their time to oversee this. So I'm really happy to see that they're taking things very slowly and carefully. By the way, I did watch Dr. Lisa Jackson speak at the last council meeting, and she was quite clear in explaining about the increase and the fact that it's not greatly changing, that when you move from 3 to 5, that doesn't mean there are going to be a whole lot more people involved. It's just that, like you said, if there's burnout or someone's not available, you can continue the work with 3 people.
Right.
And having the way, I guess, the rules were set up, they didn't have that ability to switch or change things. Everything has to be done through voting.
Yeah.
And proper legislation, so to speak. So
yeah. And when we're dealing with
it's tricky and it's very very involved.
Yeah, and these are volunteer commissioners. These are community members who care deeply about this and are volunteering their time and making sure that they have the flexibility to kind of rotate in and out and have that ability to work on things without kind of that extra demand as a volunteer, giving them some of that flexibility, I think will help the commission, and it will also provide us with a bit more transparent oversight.
Yeah, but it does look like the members on the commission have quite a professional background to be involved in this.
They do.
They were all considered very carefully before they were voted in.
They
Right.
were.
And in terms of the healthy streets, let's talk about that for the few minutes.
Yeah, briefly, I know that that's something that's going to be implemented here shortly. It got approved as part of our budget process this year. There are a number of streets in the 3rd Ward that are going to have deployments. And so I know most of them are neighborhood streets here in the 3rd Ward that from the folks who reached out to me, were really excited about it. A lot of them have pretty significant sidewalk gaps. So Brandywine, Yost, and Lillian, which are over by that community pool that kids love, Maplewood, Elmwood, and Springbrook, which have really significant sidewalk gaps. And then Granger are the neighborhood streets in the 3rd Ward. So if you're living on those, expect to see some of that deployment soon. We know that particularly since kids still can't be vaccinated, and this pandemic is not over, despite the fact that we had some good news this week with the first day of 0 confirmed cases, 0 hospitalizations, and 0 deaths. We still have a long way to go, so go get vaccinated. But we want to make sure that we're supporting our neighborhood streets and allowing folks to be able to get out and move around and have that freedom. And then the big street that will be, or the big roadway that will be impacted in the 3rd Ward is Packard. And so I do want to assure residents that as this was considered this year, we definitely took into consideration the feedback that was received last year. Packard was, the Packard deployment was changed last year after it had been implemented because of some of the problems that it created. Those considerations were taken into effect for this year's deployment, but with this year's deployment is also coming a permanent improvement to Packard. And so they will be installing bike infrastructure without reducing the number of lanes. And so after the Healthy Streets initiative this year, Packard should have permanent bike infrastructure and passageway on that street as well. And so we're looking at some really permanent improvements that make our streets more accessible for everyone.
Great. That's great news. And the 2 minutes that we have left, just a few comments maybe as to the budget, what's happening with budget.
Yeah, so we passed the budget a few meetings ago. I was really excited to be able to include an equity officer in that. I worked with Councilmember Song and the mayor on that. I think that will be incredibly important for our community if we want to maintain our commitment to anti-racism and to undoing some of the structures that have led to inequity here in our community. This is hopefully a model that we can follow at the county and really catch up to some of the work that they've been doing. But then we also know that we have some additional funds that are coming in, luckily, from the federal government, from the relief package that still have not been allocated. And so we're working with staff on how we can really utilize those funds to have the biggest impact in our community. And I continue to hope, we saw some good news yesterday out of DC that there might be an infrastructure package. I would like to see us invest more in some of our roads and make sure that we're filling some of those potholes and improving some of our streets, because frankly, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that our streets and roads are as drivable and accessible as possible.
Well, let me tell you, Travis, you certainly have taken the ball and gone running with it. It sounds like you're very involved in really making a difference and helping out the council and being responsive to the citizens in your community. And it's been a pleasure meeting you, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Absolutely. This was great. Thank you, Bonnie.
Okay. This is Bonnie Gabowitz for Ward Talk. Thank you for joining us. And I'd like to invite you to check us out at Twitter at twitter.com/CTN in Arbor. You can also email us with questions or comments at ctn@a2gov.org. Attention, Ward Talk. This is Bonnie Gabowitz. I'll see you next time.